Okay.
Hmm.
I was even making some notes because these are the things that I really would like to think about further. But Dan, I'm sure you've heard similar stories as well. From the point of TTA, what helps local companies succeed even in markets that are dominated by big tech platforms?
Well, it's interesting. I think since the introduction of Uber, and it's fine. I was living in San Francisco back in the early 2000s. I remember my black car driver that I used all the time telling me about this new app Uber and how it was going to be the best thing that ever happened to him. And I remember the early days of Uber. But I think since the introduction of Uber, there's been a settling sort of the waters a little bit, and there is a recognition of a couple things. One, it's a big market, transportation. There's a lot, it's a very big pie, and so you know you can get a slice of the pie. And I do think that the introduction of the technology that Ubers and Lyfts and other TNCs have expanded the market. It's made the market bigger. So, your slice of the pie is smaller, but it's in terms of the whole, but it's a bigger piece. But I also think, people have kind of settled down, and there are going to be people who say, "Hey, I want the cheapest route possible, the cheapest, fastest route possible." And they're always going to go with the cheapest, fastest route possible.
Hmm.
I was, as you can tell from my gray hair, it was a long time ago, but I was in my 20s once, and those were decisions I made. Living in New Orleans, hey, I just want to get home and the cheapest, fastest way possible, right?
Yeah.
Um, but there's also a recognition that, hey, if you want a little more, you you're not going to get that necessarily from a big company. If you want that security, you may not get, you may get it with a local company. So I think, there was the big push. Everyone went that way. It really crushed the taxi market. Now the taxi market's come back. In fact, we're having next month in Mobilize, we're our final presentation is a fireside chat of actually one of our big operators out in Los Angeles and Uber and the local regulator from Los Angeles, who are going to talk about the partnership that they formed now with Uber, where they're an essential part of the Uber ecosystem within Los Angeles. So, 10 years ago, if I had proposed, let's have a session where we talk about working with Uber to our members, it would have been the shortest presidency in the history of the TTA. But
Uh-huh.
things have changed. And so, it has had an impact. There is no doubt about it. But it's also opened people's awareness over the past few years that companies such as Brandy's offers a different service. And yes, they may not be able, and they may. I don't. I've not spent a lot of time on the other side of the falls in Niagara, but Uber may be able to get there just a little bit faster. Because they might have more cars in the market. But there's a trade-off that some people want to make and some people don't. So that's been a big piece. And as it applies across, beyond just taxi in the
Hmm.
NEMT world, uh, where people are making decisions for other passengers, right? Now, if I make that decision, if I decide, hey, I'm going to jump into, XYZ transportation service, I've made that decision for Dan Reid, and I bear the consequences. If I'm making that decision for somebody who I have a fiduciary responsibility for, they're on a health plan that I'm in charge of, or they're in a nursing home I own, or any number of things. People are realizing that, hey, you got to make sure you're dealing with companies that check all the boxes that you want for your passengers, because there is a difference. And 99.99% of the time it may not be a problem, but it's
Hmm.
that 1% of the time. And that's something we run into all the time in the NEMT world. We operate with best in class securement systems and best in class cameras and software in our vehicle. And I'm never going to be able to compete on a cost basis with somebody who's willing to cut corners. And 99% of the time, they're cutting the corners may get person from A to B with no problems. But that 1% of the time, it makes a big difference if that person is your loved one or your family member or you. So that recognition, I think, is starting to level out the playing field a little bit and opening up a lot of opportunities for local companies that are willing to do more than just, as we say, unlock the door and get in the car, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's not what it sounds like Brandy's company does. That's not what our company does. And if I want to compete on the, hey, unlock the door and get in the car, then I've got to be quicker, faster, and than everybody else. But if I want to compete on that extra service, my mom is 95 years old, and she just quit driving like 3 years ago, which I kept telling her, Mom, my business is about driving the elderly folks, and you're you're still driving at 92. You're not a good marketing campaign for me. But she's going to need a little extra time to get to the car, and she's going to need some help. And so that's, I want to make sure that when she's transported, she's transported with a company that is going to take that time and help her.